Hello, welcome. Thank you for being here with us today to present on the D of DBT, Dialectics and Finding the Middle Path. So we have Andrea and Gill with us today, who are occupational therapists who met while working on an adult mental health team for Vancouver Coastal Health. They share a passion for learning, practicing and teaching DBT skills, and they have over 20 years of DBT teaching experience between them. Jill is also a mindful self-compassion teacher trained through the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion and a trained mindfulness facilitator through the UCLA Semel Institute in Neuroscience and Human Behaviour. Andrea and Gill currently run the Livewell DBT Skills Group. I'll hand it over to you now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bailey. And yeah, we're delighted to be here. So I'm just going to introduce us a little bit further and tell you about what we're planning to talk about tonight. I guess I just want to start with a shout out though to Bailey, because for those of you who don't know, she won the Courage to Come Back award this week, and that's a big deal. So I encourage you to check her out on all of her videos. And also thank you, Bailey, for organizing tonight. I guess why we're here. So it's Mental Health Awareness Month, and so Andrea and I wanted to do a presentation in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, also in support of the BPD Society and all of the great work they do. Our clients have attended the support groups, and we wanted to be supportive. And I guess in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, we're also here just in solidarity with all of the people living with BPD and mental health problems, and their family and their friends. And then the next slide, it just talks a little bit more about what we're currently doing. So Andrea and I are from Livewell DBT. This is a group we started about 3 years ago now. We found ourselves working part-time, and it was kind of a mid-career challenge to take on doing a private group. And we were motivated because working in public health for our careers, we know how few resources there are for BPD and how few DBT services there are. And so that's how Livewell began. So what's our talk tonight? And Andrea, I can't actually see the slides, but you can.
I know, having a bit of technical issues. Yeah, they stopped moving. They stopped working. So I'm just trying to, oh, there we go.
Oh, there. Yeah, there's our webpage. And we'll see how the slides progress moving forward. Great. So yeah, today's agenda. So I'm going to start off by talking a bit about the dialectic and how it found itself in DBT. I think part of the reason Andrea and I chose to talk about DBT when we were thinking about, well, what would be a good topic? We were both like dialectics. We both are fascinated by it. It's helped both of us in our own lives. And I was actually quite curious of why and how it became part of DBT. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. Then we're going to share some personal examples, like I said, and do a practice exercise, and then wrap up. Okay, so now I get to talk about how Marsha Lanahan got dialectics into DBT. So I have a picture of her book. It's called Building a Life Worth Living by Marsha Lanahan. And I know Andrea's trying to share screen. I'm not sure. What do you think, Bailey? Like, do most people just listen, or do they listen with screen?
I can try to do the screen share for you folks
Okay.
and see if
it just keeps, it's working and then it's not working anymore.
And then it's not working. So I'll continue while we're sorting it out. So many of you may have already read, and if you haven't, I highly recommend Marsha Lanahan's Building a Life Worth Living, which she published in 2021, I think. And it's her own story of living with BPD, as well as her story of how she created DBT. And so I want you to go ahead, thanks, Bailey, to I took a quote right out of this book because the question was answered when I read this book. Can you find that slide, Bailey? Next one. That's the definition of dialectic if if you Google it. So this is right out of Marsha's book. And here's what she said. One day, I was talking to my executive assistant, Elizabeth Trias, about this therapy. And she said, Marsha, your treatment is dialectical. Dialectics? I'd never heard of it. So I looked it up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary and found the following definition: a method of examining and discussing opposing ideas in order to find the truth. I like to think of it as the tension or synthesis between opposites. Dialectical behavioral therapy seems an appropriate name, reflecting, as it does, the tension between seeking change in people and encouraging them to embrace acceptance. And so the book goes on to talk about, after she looked up dialectics in the dictionary, she then went on to call up the philosophy department. She was at the University of Washington, and have some conversations. The book doesn't really get into what those conversations were, but I became fascinated. I'm like, well, where did it come from? And so I did a bit of research on my own, and I found an org chart. This is a org chart of Western philosophers. It's just part of it. And if you see down there under German idealism in the 17th to 19th centuries, a fellow there, Hegel, his name comes up a lot when you Google dialectics and philosophy. And he's kind of credited with this idea of synthesis and antithesis equaling synthesis. The group of German idealists, as you see on the screen, related to skepticism in the assertion that reality is but a construct of our mind and probably immaterial, which kind of made sense to me when I thought about how we think about dialectics, but I wanted to learn more. So I came across Baxter, and I think that's the next slide. So Baxter is a scholar and a teacher at the University of Iowa, and she and her colleague, Barbara Montgomery, came up with relational dialectic theory in 1998, which is around the time when Marsha was working on DBT. And I was drawn to it because I thought, that's where Marsha's getting some of her ideas. I'm not sure, but they're similar. So relational dialectics assumes that relationships are not linear. Relational life is characterized by change. Contradiction is the fundamental fact of relational life. Communication is central to organizing and negotiating relational contradictions. And interestingly, dialectics, when you look in the manual, it's found in the interpersonal effectiveness module. So who knows if Baxter and Marsha talked? I'm not sure, but I thought it was kind of interesting that this series is sort of similar, and it kind of helped me answer the question a little bit of how Marsha incorporated these different components that she calls dialectical thinking. And so I'm going to hand things over to Andrea, who's going to dive a little deeper into these 4 components that Marsha talks about in dialectics.
So that's the next slide. Yeah. So the dialectical perspective, as it's laid out in DBT, has 4 principles. So we're going to talk about all of these. The first one we're going to talk about is that the universe is full of opposing forces. Change is the only constant. All things are connected, and change is transactional, meaning that we affect our environment and our environment affects us. Next slide. So we thought that we would give you a little glimpse of how we use dialectics in our own life. And so we're going to tell you a couple, well, we're each going to share a personal example. I'm going to talk about a phase that my daughter went through or has been going through, and Jill's going to talk about something that happened with her mom. So Jill, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. And so Andrea said, as you see, we're going to talk about before we applied dialectical thinking. So my story is from Mother's Day that just happened. It was in May. And leading up to it, a friend of mine had asked me to come to a concert. She said, it's on Mother's Day, so get back to me. And I said, okay, I'll talk to my mom. I'll figure out if she's traveling. I think she might be traveling. Anyway, I asked my mom if she was going to be around for Mother's Day, and she said she was. And so fast forward to the week before Mother's Day, I sent an email to my mom. I'd picked out this cafe that I'd been wanting to take her to actually since the pandemic, but the hours got decreased and we never made it. So I was pretty excited. And she emailed me back and said, oh, like I'm at the cabin that weekend. We'll do it another time. And so I was feeling irritated, frustrated, disappointed, and just like really, like I thought we had a plan. I'm just feeling like throwing my hands up. So that's where I was when I got that email.
Okay. And then with mine, so when my daughter became a teenager a couple of years ago, she started going through this phase where when she got angry, she would lash out physically. And for me, this was really tough because I had not experienced something like this in a relationship before. And like quite frankly, I was horrified by it. I like was a fish out of water. I didn't know how to handle it, and I had a lot of judgment about it. So things that were going through my mind were like, this violent behavior is horrible. It's disrespectful. I won't tolerate it. Um, and so when she would lash out, I would react to her from a place of anger, yelling and saying things that likely shamed this horrible behavior, shamed her and like calling it horrible behavior. And you can imagine what happened. The violence escalated, our connection diminished. And after the episodes would end, I would end up feeling ashamed of the way that I acted, even though I didn't think that her behavior was acceptable. I just had a lot of shame about the way that I showed up to the situation. Let's move on to the next slide. So the dialectical perspective was really helpful. At least I think for both of us in these situations. So the first principle, the universe is filled with opposing sides or forces, and both of these things can be true at the same time. So we can experience these opposing forces within ourselves. And so for me, within myself, I was angry at my daughter. And at the same time, I wanted to be close to her. And how about for you, Jill?
I think for me, I kind of know this about my mom. She's like, Mother's Day or birthdays, they're just Hallmark holidays. It's just another day, Jill. Like I kind of know that about her. But I guess my mom's getting older and I'm like, no, it's not. Like it's actually quite a special day. So different opinions that are kind of in conflict with one another about
Mm.
the same topic, Mother's Day.
Right. And so, her opinion doesn't make sense to you, and your opinion doesn't make sense to her.
Yep.
And
Like,
both can be true at
mm-hmm.
the same time. Right. Okay. So next slide. So as Jill mentioned briefly, this can best be described by this Hegel's idea, where thesis, so one opposing view, plus its opposite, the antithesis, if we can hold both of those, we have a synthesis. And I was kind of playing around with color and I tried to represent this through color. So like red plus blue is not red blue, but it actually creates something that's greater than the sum of the parts. It's purple. Purple's a bit of it's a different thing than red blue. And I think that's like when we get really entrenched in one pole, we can't see the synthesis. So we only see red, for example. And when that happens, we can be really filled with judgment. So for me, it was, I'm so angry at her horrible behavior. I'm right. She's wrong. I was really entrenched in that. But as I applied a dialectical view and embraced the synthesis between the two opposing parts, which I'm going to go into after, it really helped me to get unstuck from where I was. Um, and so when I did that, my perspective widened, and it led to a greater understanding of what she was going through and how I needed to respond. Um, New perspectives emerged, new ways to solve the problem emerged moving forward in a way that aligned with my wise mind. And in the end, after I was able to think more dialectically and apply that to the situation with my daughter, um, both of our suffering went down. I felt more fulfilled as a mom, and in our relationship, we felt more connected. And ultimately, I felt more effective. And I'm so happy to say that our relationship is so much better now. Jill, I don't know if you want to comment on that at this
Yeah,
point.
well, I mean, my story evolved because I kind of was at this like, oh, whatever, fine. We just will skip Mother's Day. We'll do nothing. But my wise mind was like, that's not according to my values. As I said, my mom's getting older, and so spending time with her is important. And kind of like a myth I might have about relationships that, you know what, if I tried, you should try, and I'm like done trying. So I was like, whatever, I'm going to try again. And so I did, and we actually got together just this past weekend, and it was different. It was a purple. It was at the cafe, but it wasn't just with my mom. My dad came too. Um, you know what? It wasn't on Mother's Day. It was on a different day. So it was different. And I think for me, just noticing the opposing views and that they both can be true allowed me to move beyond my entrenched view of things and behave differently.
Yeah. And I think, maybe Mother's Day wasn't the way that you had originally thought it was going to be, but it was something special for you with your family being together, it sounds like.
Yeah, I kind of let go of my idea of how it should be. That was definitely important for me to enjoy it. Otherwise, I would have showed up with like we should have been meeting on Mother's Day. Dad, you shouldn't be here. Like I had let go of that.
Right. Yeah, that's great. It gets into the next thing I wanted to talk about. So, yeah, so we wanted to share some particular steps for thinking and acting dialectically, which, go lead us from a place of, suffering and internal conflict or conflict between two people or more to a more of a peaceful place. So next slide, we'll get into that. So how to think and act dialectically. Um, so I think, Jill, you were sort of talking about this just now, like noticing that you were entrenched in judgment.
Mm.
And that's, this is where we can bring our mindfulness skills in. Like the first thing we need to do is actually notice that this is happening for us. Um, and when we're in that judgments, we can, for those of you who are students and practicers of DBT, you know that when we have a lot of judgments, we go into emotion mind. And when we're in emotion mind, we're ruled and we're fueled by our emotions, action urges, which make it a lot harder to be effective in our lives. Um, and so Jill was talking about some of the judgments, like she should be wanting to just spend time with me. That's kind of a clue that we're in judgment. Um, were there any other judgments, Jill, that you noticed?
Yeah, you should set aside Mother's Day. You
Right.
shouldn't go to the cabin. Yeah,
Okay.
like a lot
Yeah.
of
So
shoulds
lots of shoulds.
for behavior.
Yeah. I think for me in my example, there were a lot of kind of labels. Like I was labeling her behavior as horrible. Um, Kind of comparing, like, this isn't how people are supposed to act. Like this isn't how teenagers act, or a teenager that I know, or the way that I didn't act this way. Um, and so these shoulds and comparisons and labeling and this black and white thinking are signs that we're in judgment. And so once we can observe that and kind of observe and describe it, name it, we can try to separate judgments from the facts. Facts are what we can observe with our senses, not the stories that we tell ourselves, the shoulds, the comparisons, the labels. It's, what I said, what she said, what I did, what she did. So for example, maybe what might have caused an outburst in my daughter was I told her to get off her screen in a loud voice. I felt angry. She said no. I said I was going to take her screen away. She kicked me. So that's just the facts. And I see we have someone joined us. Welcome. So once we've separated judgments from facts, we can kind of get in touch with our wise mind. That place where we not only feel emotions, but we don't lose the access to our ability to problem solve. And that's our wise mind. So we can ask ourselves when we've accessed that wise mind, what are the values that I want to guide me? And I know, Jill, that's something that you did with your mom that helped you kind of get away from that entrenched place of like, oh, well, forget it.
Yeah, because those emotions were leading me to just like avoid and check out. It was almost like, huh, fine. But I knew that wasn't in line with my value. And so I was able to recognize that from a place of wise mind. My
Mhm.
value is to take the time, make the effort to spend time with my mom.
Right. And I guess for me, when I looked at my value, it was to be a loving mom, a patient and loving mom.
Hmm.
So that really, once I got in touch with that, that was like, okay, well, if that's the way I want to be, how do I move forward? And so then once we do that, we can validate both sides and work to balance opposites. You can ask yourself, okay, what am I missing here? And sometimes it helps to play devil's advocate. Um, and it's hard sometimes to do this. Like it kind of you have to be humble, especially when you're looking at the kernel of truth in somebody else's perspective. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to drop the righteous attitude of like, okay, well, it's my way and they're wrong. It's you have to be humble and be like, okay, well, what am I missing here? And for me, it was kind of looking at the two parts within myself. Um, I was super angry at the way that she was acting, and on the other side, I I wasn't paying a lot of attention to that part of me that wanted to be compassionate, that was compassionate, and recognizing that she's going through a hard time. Being a teenager is really hard. Um, and it was just eclipsed by anger. So kind of bringing to the fore this compassionate part of me that felt um, not only angry, but more like, yes, she's saying hurtful things, but I understand that she's hurting underneath and that this aggressive behavior is her just struggling and looking for love and comfort. Um,
Yeah, and I guess I would point out how dialectics I think is useful. We're not negating Andrea's anger and frustration. It makes sense she feels angry and frustration. What we're doing is we're looking at the other side, that her daughter is experiencing fear and frustration and it's leading her to act out. So it's embracing both sides, but within ourselves, like Andrea can feel anger and feel compassion. Like both are okay and both can coexist.
yeah, and I think that leads us to the next part about language.
Mm,
Oh, no, don't change the slide yet, thanks. Um, yeah, like changing this idea of either or to both and, always, never to sometimes. Like it's just more of an inclusive, embracing language. Um, I'm angry and I'm compassionate. And when you're talking with people, I think this one's a key one, changing the word but to and. So what's like, if you think about this statement, I love you, but your behavior isn't okay, versus I love you and your behavior isn't okay. It's like, to me, it feels viscerally different. And it's confusing, I think. So we have to embrace the confusion that comes with holding two opposing things at the same time. Um, it feels chaotic, I think, within us to be holding two opposing forces. I know for me, it was when I first was going through this, um, this idea of I can be angry and hurt, and I can be loving and calm. Like that just like is kind of revolutionary for me to think like that. Like I really was stuck in the angry and hurt place. Um, but it was really helpful to be able to go, okay, hold on. Even though feels weird within me, I want to embrace this kind of chaos within me. I don't know if you had that experience at all, Jill, in your
I think
example.
for me, it was maybe this idea that, and so for those of you who joined us, my story was about my mom skipping Mother's Day, which made me feel really frustrated. Um, so the kernel of truth on her side, just another day, Hallmark holiday, we can get together anytime. Like I do understand that perspective. So that helped. And my perspective that it is a special day is also true. So just holding both of those just helped me understand her better and move to more problem solving with more ease.
Mm-hmm. So making lemonade out of lemons is the last piece. And that's where we sort of look at taking something that's problematic and seeing if we can find a silver lining. So for me, it was, I would get stuck in this worrying that she was really hurt, and recognizing that being hurt and struggling gives her an opportunity to build resilience. So when I got stuck in that fear of like, oh gosh, what's going to happen, I was able to make lemonade out of lemons and go, well, she's building resilience through this. So just noticing time, moving on to the next slide. So we talked a lot about this universe is full of opposing forces. We're going to move on now to change is the only, oh no, not, no, sorry. We're going to start with all things are connected. So next slide. We can get really egocentric. It can become all about me, my needs. And when coming from this place, it's hard to be open-minded about both sides of an issue. So it's helpful to remember that we're all connected. You know, people are energetically connected, animals, nature. We're all connected to everything around us. And I think for me, this principle can help me remember because we're all connected, to treat other people as I would want to be treated, and to act from a more compassionate place, especially when I'm in a situation where I don't agree with somebody else. Jill, jump in if you have anything else to say about.
Yeah, I think I'll leave this one.
Okay, next one. Change is constant. This can be hard for people. I know, at times in my life, it's been really tough to deal with change. It's a lot more comforting to be able to predict things, to have like that predictability to hold on to, certainty. It's so much more comforting. But when we hold on too tight to how things are, it can cause us suffering because life is full of change. We're always changing our relationships, our bodies, nature, whether we like it or not, we're always changing. There's no such thing as this will always be this way. So if we can embrace change, it helps us to respond to life with more flexibility and with more of a growth mindset, which is seeing how difficult times are full of opportunities for growth and develop, sort of like that making lemonade out of lemons. I have to go back to that slide. I find this principle really comforting for me, especially in this situation with my daughter. Um, it reminded me that both me and my daughter had the capacity for change, and that this too, this difficult time will pass. Today is hard, tomorrow could be different, next year could be completely different. And if I keep being effective, I will change in a direction that aligns with my values. And remembering that change is always occurring, it made me feel really hopeful because I just remembered there's so many potential outcomes and opportunities that could arise, that it kind of got me away from thinking about, oh, this is so difficult. It's like, yeah, it is difficult, and who knows what's going to happen tomorrow or the next day. So
Yeah,
hope.
for me, for this one, it made me reflect about, Mother's Day over the years. And I'll be honest, I would say 10 years ago, I didn't care as much about Mother's Day. I was more in line with my mom, like it's just another day. But I think she's aging. I'm aging. Time is precious. So I have to acknowledge that my opinions about Mother's Day have changed as well. And I think we're all changing in relationships. And so acknowledging that also helped me move away from that pull of I'm right all the time or in this situation.
For sure. Okay, so then finally we come to our fourth one. Change is transactional. So this idea that we affect our environment and our environment affects us, and that just keeps continuing. There have been causes and conditions that have led up to this moment. So many different transactions have brought us here. And I find that when we consider this, it's easier to let go of blame. So back to the story about my daughter, I've learned over the years that she is a very sensitive being. And if she even detects like a small look of disapproval on my face, that can cause her mood and demeanor to change and sour. And she might become agitated with me or her sister, which could cause me to become frustrated. And when I'm frustrated, I have less patience and a shorter fuse. And with my shorter fuse, she feels defensive and becomes angry. And so it's like this interplay between her and I, like me and our environment. And then this leads to violence for her. And it's all traced back, maybe, to that look of disapproval that I had on my face, which maybe I walked in the front door after a difficult day at work and it had nothing even to do with her. So that's just kind of a microcosm of how we affect our environment and our environment affects us. And I find it really helpful when thinking dialectically to embrace this transactional nature. Because as I said before, it kind of makes us more humble, and we realize like, okay, well, maybe I had a part in this. What part did I play? And it helps us to have more of an open mind and not just, and get out of that, like, I'm right, they're wrong place. Anybody?
Yeah,
Jill?
for me, it was thinking, well, why does my mom have this opinion that it's just another day, it's a Hallmark holiday? I don't know. Like a bit of embracing confusion. We're from different generations. We have different influences. So it just kind of, yeah, it definitely moved me away from blame. I'm not sure why she has that opinion. Just helped me take a step back and recognize all of the changes and conditions in her life that may have led her to have that opinion.
Okay, so I think we've got 4 minutes left, Jill, for your exercise. Quick 4-minute exercise.
I don't know. I'm kind of thinking, given the time we have left, it would probably make more sense just to sum up because I don't think it's enough time.
No?
But I think had we done our exercise, it was just a chance for you. And I guess I would give you this for home practice. After this presentation, we all have relationships, right, that are a little strained or in transition. And I would invite you to reflect on one that you're currently in, and consider how these ideas that Andrea and I are talking about might apply to your relationship, and see if you can get some purple when you think about it. So why don't we leave it at that? And then the final slide was coming back to the topic of this talk today. So Marcia talks about the middle path, and so dialectics is really a tool, an avenue to help us get there. And so this is right out of the skills training manual. Thinking dialectically helps us walk the middle path between extremes. And this does not mean, 50% of one point of view, 50% of the other. This means more of a synthesis. And I love Andrea's color purple idea, right? It's not blue, it's not red, it's purple. So it's creative. It's creative. It asks you to be curious as you're noticing opposition and finding out how to get unstuck. So to walk the middle path is to move away from extreme emotional responses. Andrea and I shared some of ours in our talk today. Actions I was ready to check on out, and thinking, and towards more balance and integrative responses to life situations. So in my situation, it was like a day out with my dad. He came too. It wasn't on Mother's Day. Different, right? A dialectical stance is essential for walking the middle path because it decreases a sense of isolation, conflict, and polarities. So that's the D in dialectics. And I know Andrea and I had a lot of fun just diving into this a little more. It's a big topic. So I'd encourage you, Google dialectics, see what you can learn. And Bailey, thanks so much for hosting us tonight. For those of you listening live, and for those of you who decide to join asynchronous, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I learned a lot. I thought I knew a lot about dialectics, but there's always more to learn, and I love those pieces. And then bringing them into practice with relationships was also really nice. And I'll just drop in the chat links for your programs and services that you offer. So you are running dialectical behavioral therapy groups. And so if anyone is interested, you're welcome to check them out at livewelldbt.com. Yeah, thanks again.